Awesome. Well, hey, we're going to jump into part 4, our last and final part of our series, Origin Stories. And I got to tell you, I had a quandary this week coming into this, because in this series, Origin Stories, we've been diving in every week to some of the earliest stories, some of those ancient stories about God and our world. And my quandary coming into this week was this is the last week of our series, but there are still 3 more stories that I wanted to cover in this series. So I just kind of figured if you guys aren't doing anything after this, just kind of hang out a little bit. I'll tell you 2 more. No, I won't do that to you. We got 3 stories that I hope to cover in this series. We're not going to cover all 3. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to skip the first one of those 3. We're going to skip the first one. The first one is a story about a man named Noah. We'll just kind of skip that one. Many of you are probably familiar with it. If you're not familiar with the story of Noah, I'll just summarize it really quickly for you. Noah liked big boats, and he cannot lie. So, very honest man, high man of character, and also a great boat builder, a great ship builder. So we're going to skip that story today, but you can read it on your own. Would encourage you to do that. We're going to dive in deep to the second story, and then at the end, we're going to touch just briefly on the third story, because if you don't at least have a little bit of the third story, you don't have the full meaning of the second story. Now, before we jump into that, though, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about what feels like the most important story in the room, and that's honestly your story. I mean, every one of us walked in here, and we've said this throughout the series, every one of us have walked in here in the middle of a story. You are in the middle of a story in your own life. In the middle of your story, right, feels like the middle in so many ways. Some of us feel like we're in the middle of our financial journey, right? Like you kind of like started your career, you started building your financial journey, and you kind of go like, oh, I don't really know where this is going to go or how this is going to end. For me, some of us feel like we're in the middle of our family, right? Like you started a family, and now you're a parent, and you're like, began that, but now you're in the middle of it, and you're like, I don't really know how these kids are going to turn out. I don't really know where this is headed in this story. Some of us feel like we're in the middle of our marriage, right? Like you got married, and you felt like, hey, this is going to be easy. We got this figured out. And then you got a few weeks in, and you realized everyone else was right, And so you find yourself in the middle of that going like, I don't know how we're going to figure all of this out. The middle of our story is actually, honestly, like where the confusion and the chaos happens. The beginning of our story, the first parts feel calm, right? They feel settled. They feel kind of just like normal and easy. The end of our story feels quite resolved, But the middle of our story, the middle is where we feel confused. The middle is where we find ourselves unsure. The middle is where we have all kinds of questions about ourselves, about faith, and about the world around us. Now, the middle of the story also comes with a little bit of pressure, quite honestly, because you and I feel the pressure because you are at least supposed to be the hero of your story. At least it feels that way. In fact, everybody's kind of told you that, kind of explained that to you or suggested that to you. Guys, if we need to drop the TV, we can drop the TV. Whatever we need to do there is fine. Whatever you need to do, Matt, feel free to go. You're good. But you find yourself in the middle. Like you find yourself feeling like you need to be the hero of your own story. In fact, you've been kind of told that, right? You were kind of raised with kind of that perspective in so many ways. People told you about the things that you're going to do to make a difference in the world, how you're going to be a world changer, how you're going to shift things, right? Like how you're going to be someone who makes a significant difference in the world around you, and you feel like you have to live up to that expectation. You've sat in situations and stories where someone looked at you and said, hey, you get like, a tomb. They talked about your tombstone, and they tell you about, there's like 2 dates on your tombstone, and there's a dash, and they're like, what you do with that dash is what matters. And they put so much pressure on that, and you feel all that, and you feel like in some way or another, like you have to leave a legacy behind. Like you have to do something that matters. You have to do something massively significant in the middle of your story, and you have to leave in some way, shape, or form a legacy, right? And in fact, some of us feel this in different ways. I got an email this week from my bank. The subject of the email said, build your financial legacy. And I just thought, man, y'all clearly didn't look at my bank account before you sent me that email, but I appreciate you believing in me. Y'all are great too, like thanks for that, But you feel that at times, right? Like you feel like you've got to do something that's going to leave something for someone beyond you. Others of us feel that, right? As parents, like you look at your kids, and you don't want to be like a good parent. You want to be the best parent your kid could possibly have and leave something behind in him or in her. Some of us feel that in our careers, right? Like you feel like you have these things that you want to accomplish, these things that you want to do, these things that you want to see go so well, right? There's a piece of you that just goes like, hey, I don't know if I'm ever going to quite live up to that. And Scott, if we need to just cut it, we can cut it. If we don't have a solution, let's just kill it, if that's okay. It's great. But some of us feel that, right? Like we feel the need to live up to some kind of a legacy, but if we're honest with ourselves, so often what we don't feel is legacy. What we actually feel is lost. Like we feel like lost in the middle of our own story. My counselor not too long ago asked me a question. We were talking, and he asked me this question. He said, "Hey," he said, like, what's your greatest fear?" I was like, "Well, you mean besides going grocery shopping with my 6-year-old? You know, like, or do you want deep? Okay, you want deeper than that? Okay, sure." And honestly, I thought about it for a minute, but it didn't take me all that long. I thought about it for a second. You know what I said? Mediocrity. Like, you know that place? Like the worst thing that could happen for me is getting stuck in that place between, like, just good enough and great. Like, just stuck in the middle of that where I'm like, I'm a good dad. I'm not a bad dad. I'm not a great dad, you know? Being stuck in that spot of, like, I'm a good leader. I'm not a great leader. Be that stuck in that spot of, like, I'm good at managing the things in my life and kind of keeping things together and building something that matters, but I'm not, like, great at, like, I would rather just, like, hit rock bottom and just know that I'm bad at those things so that I can go then focus myself on other things that maybe I could build up and leave some kind of a legacy in and do something significant in. But, like, that middle ground of just, like, being stuck in the middle of, like, just good enough, mediocrity, that just, like, that sounds worse than failure to me. Because all of us find ourselves asking that question, like, is my life actually going to matter at the end of this? Am I actually going to do something that made a difference beyond my life? Now, in this series, we've been talking about this group of people, this group of ancient people who were known as the Hebrew people, really kind of the pre-Israelites or kind of the group of people who became kind of the Israelites as we know them today. And the Hebrew people found themselves asking questions like this and feeling lost like this at several points in their history as a group of people. But one of the most significant points that they felt lost in was this period of time we've been talking about known as the Babylonian exile. Right? The Babylonian exile, this period of time where they were actually conquered by the Babylonian Empire, exiled from their own land, taken into the Babylonian Empire itself, taken into Babylon, and forced to live there instead. And they found themselves confused and unsure, wondering, is anything going to happen in my life? Are we actually going to be able to build anything that matters out of this? And they found themselves in that season really surrounded by the greatness of someone else. Like, they found themselves surrounded by the greatness of the Babylonians, and it was evident, and it was prominent, and it was so obvious, right? They found themselves kind of looking at this and going like, hey, will we ever live up to anything like that? Because you know this, nothing's more demoralizing than finding yourself in the shadow of someone else's greatness. And nothing will cause you to question the significance of your life than living right next to someone who's living a life of seemingly or visibly more significance than you. In that moment, the Hebrew people found themselves surrounded visibly by this. In fact, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote just about 100 years after the Babylonian exile. He wrote and described the city of Babylon in great detail, and it's fascinating. Look at what he said. He said, in Assyria, there are many other great cities, but the most famous and the strongest city within that region was Babylon. He said, in the middle of one division of the city stands a royal palace, or the royal palace, and in the middle of the other division of the city, to this day, stands the sacred enclosure of Zeus, Belus. Some of you are familiar or have heard of a god named Baal, who they worshiped. It's the same god, just different name in this passage or this text by Herodotus. He says that in the center of this sacred enclosure, a solid tower has been built, 220 yards long and broad. So this tower is literally 2 football fields wide and 2 football fields deep, and France would be very jealous right now if they could see this, you know? But it says the second tower rises from this first tower, and from it yet another, until at last there are 8 towers. So 8 towers, but not 8 separate towers, stacked on top of each other, higher and higher and higher and higher. He says in the last tower there's a great shrine, and in that shrine stands a great and well-covered couch and a golden table nearby. Now, the Hebrew people find themselves living in the Babylonian Empire, living in and near the city of Babylon, and find themselves literally in the shadow of this thing that just symbolizes the greatness of this empire. Now, the tower that he's describing here is known kind of historically or archaeologically as a ziggurat. Everybody, just for fun, it's a fun word to say. Everybody say ziggurat. Boy, you said, nice job, first try. I like it. Okay, ziggurat. A ziggurat is basically this religious structure they would built, but it wasn't a temple. They would often build it right next to They're temples. Now, I'll show you a picture of one of these here real quick. This is not the ziggurat in Babylon because that one is no longer kind of been able to be kind of recovered. This is a ziggurat known as the Great Ziggurat of Ur. It's in Iraq. So this is kind of the best example, like today, if you one that you could go and visit. You could go and visit this ziggurat right now. Okay, what you're looking at right now is just the base. Like, Herodotus just talked about 8 towers, one on top of each other. That's the first one. Okay. Now, they would build these towers, and they would build them on top of each other, and they build them as a religious structure right next to the temple, but not to replace the purpose of the temple. It was different than that. They would build these towers as a way of getting up to the heavens in their mind. And the whole purpose was not so that they could climb up the tower and try to get closer to the gods. The whole purpose of these towers was to invite and entice the gods to come down these towers or down the stairs on the outsides of these towers to receive their worship or their gifts within the temple. This wasn't a stairway to heaven. It was actually a stairway built from heaven in an attempt to entice and invite the gods to come down and visit them and participate in their plans. Now, the Hebrew people found themselves surrounded by the city of Babylon, surrounded by the Babylonian Empire, the symbols of greatness one after the other, and in the shadow of this great tower. And the Hebrew people had a story. It was a story about this tower. And it was a story about how this tower was built. And the story is interesting. I mean, it's subversive, and it's ironic, and it's a little bit political in the way that it talks about things, and it pokes fun, and it prods, and it kind of like draws out weaknesses where there don't appear to be weaknesses. And the whole kind of focus of the story suggests to them during the Babylonian Empire that this empire isn't as great as it first appears. The story was captured within the book of Genesis. And the story, as the author captured it, begins like this. Sarah, we're going to go straight to the text. The story says this. He says, now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Now, this is interesting. When they say that, hey, we say, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. This sounds really simple to you, but in the time period, this is a massive technological advancement, okay? These aren't just bricks, they're actually baking bricks because they discovered if they bake the brick, it actually is significantly stronger and they can build much sturdier and much stronger structures out of it. And so now they've developed this thing and discovered this technological advancement for their moment in their space and time, and now they have to do something with it, or they get to do something with it. And what we do in moments where we discover something new or we create something new matters and says something about us. And so the Hebrew people in this story tell us what these people did the moment that they discovered this new advancement in their own culture. They did something for themselves in this moment. They said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Now remember again, the goal is for this tower to have its top in the heavens, not so that we can reach the heavens, but so that the heavens might be enticed to come down to us. And they said, why would we do this? Like, what's the purpose of this? They said, and now we'll do this. Why? To let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the whole earth. So we're going to do this. Why? To make a name for ourselves, do something that might last beyond us and something by which we might be remembered for. This is greatness. This is legacy. This is a desire to do something significant that they will be remembered for far beyond their own lives. Now, the author in this moment, it gets kind of fun. There's this moment of irony that if you move past it really fast, you kind of miss it, but I just think it's kind of hilarious. Watch this. He says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. So wait, they're building a tower to the heavens, and yet the Lord still has to come down to see it. The Hebrew people are saying that they're poking fun. They're like, yeah, it's big, but it ain't that big, you know? So they're sitting in that, and then they go on and say, the Lord said, behold, they are one people and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be possible, will now be impossible for them. So this is getting out of hand. They're inviting us and enticing the God into their plans, but they're not actually like talking with him about it, creating space for him about it. They're just kind of inviting him into what they're already doing. So God says, come, let us go down, and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city, which again is a bit of irony. the thing they feared, said, let us do this so that we may not be dispersed. The thing they feared actually comes true in this moment. They actually find themselves dispersed, even though all of this was an attempt to not be dispersed and make a name great for themselves. And now the author gets to the point of the story. And if you were ever to hear kind of a story as a kid, that sounds like this. We kind of talk about like the moral of a story. The author kind of gets to the moral, the point of the story. And the point of the story is all around how this great city got its name. It says this, therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. The Hebrew word for Babel sounds it's just one syllable off from the word for confused. It said, hey, this great empire that has this great tower that we find ourselves sitting in the shadow of, yeah. You know how they began? They began confused. They began uncertain, and God scrambled all of it up. In that moment, now this seems foreign to us, but quite honestly, you and I both know how moments like this feel. I mean, you've had moments in your life where you were building something that you felt like was great. You felt like it was significant. You felt like it was the thing that was going to make a difference. And just when it felt like you were almost done and almost there, all of a sudden it all began to unravel. And you felt the confusion of moments like that. You felt the disappointment of moments like that. You felt the scattering in your life when things that you thought were almost there all of a sudden come crashing down or come to a complete halt. The Hebrew people, that's what's fascinating. The Hebrew people tell this story about how the Babylonian Empire they found themselves captives of. They tell a story about them and how they came to be and how they began to build. But then they also had a story about how their own people, the Hebrew people, began. And what's fascinating, that's the second origin story we're going to touch on just for a second. What's fascinating about that second origin story is it's way more simple, and it's way smaller, and it's way less exciting than the first. They told the story about a man named Abram, and the way that he became the father of the Hebrew people, the starting point for the Israelites. But Abram was just like a normal dude. We don't really have much context for Abram. He wasn't this great guy. We don't even know why he was selected, really. I mean, he's a good guy, but he's just a normal guy. And honestly, Abram didn't really do all that much in his lifetime. He had a kid, 2 kids, technically. That's it. He's supposed to be the father of this Hebrew people, but like in his lifetime, it felt like very little happened. But the story that the Hebrew people told about Abram and the way that he began versus the Babylonians, the way that they began, is so starkly different. And the meaning's actually in the convergence or the congruence of that. Let's look at this. The way they talk about Abram, they said, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Just go. Go and leave your family in this moment. Go, leave their house to the place I'm going to show you. He says, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. From that moment, Abram did. He stepped out. He and his wife, and none others. They went. And they journeyed on their own. He had one kid with his wife's servant. He had another kid with his wife, through whom the Hebrew people continued. But nothing massively significant happened in Abram's life. He was the starting point, but he was far from the ending point. And yet he was the story and the person celebrated by the Hebrew people about how they began. And when you look at the contrast between the story of the beginning of this Babylonian Empire, and you look at the contrast of the story of the Hebrew people, what you find is a very, very different sense of where their origins are. Look at this. In Babylon, the story says, their greatest fear was dispersion. On the other hand, Abram is called to go. He's actually told to disperse in a way himself. The Babylonians made plans, and then they invited the gods into their plans, doing everything they could to invite and entice God into the world that they were already creating. In contrast, Abram accepted an invitation into God's plan. He didn't build it himself. He didn't create it himself. He just said yes to an invitation to step into a journey. And in Babylon, the whole focus, the whole desire, the whole goal was to make a name for themselves. You know, the contrast in a much smaller way, but a far more significant way in time, Abram is told by God that I will make your name great. And for the Hebrew people in exile, stories like this served as a reminder for them about where they came from. It also served as an encouragement for them in periods of time where they felt lost in the middle of their own story, wondering if anything great was actually going to happen in and through them, wondering if anything significant would actually come because of their lives. And the reminder to them, I think, ought to be a reminder to us this morning is this: that greatness is not defined by the size of your role. It's not defined by the significance or the scope of what you do in a moment. No. It's defined by the size of the story that you're a part of. The willingness to actually step into something bigger than you. The willingness to actually step into something that doesn't feel like it's done yet or anywhere near completion and actually begin to participate in it. And the willingness to actually lean into the things that matter most, even if it feels like you can't do the most in the things that matter. I was at an event not too long ago. A friend of mine runs an organization that's focused really specifically on rescuing women out of sex trafficking. It's a phenomenal organization. They had a phenomenal event, and it really was a fundraiser. It was a benefit for their organization so that people could help partner with them to rescue more and more women out of the sex trade industry. It's a phenomenal group. You know what one of the most meaningful moments and powerful moments in that event was, at least for me? It was when he paused in the middle of his event and he called out every other organization that was represented in the room that was also working to end sex trafficking. And in that moment, you recognize that he saw what they did as significantly important, but he didn't see it as isolated and on an island. And he recognized that what they were doing mattered, but what they were doing was also a part of something way bigger than them that was going to require far more people and far more resources than they could ever muster, and far more organizations partnering together to do something great. That's the kind of person who understands. The size of our greatness is determined by the size of the story that we're willing to step into. Not too long ago, I was at an event for pastors who are a part of our network of churches, kind of all of our like-minded churches that come together and do things together. There's a number of things that are able to be done because like-minded churches are coming together. We're able to send missionaries out and through that movement. We're able to plant more churches through that movement. We're able to do far more together than we can on our own as individual churches. But at this meeting, there was this conversation, and there's about 200 pastors in the room. There's this conversation about the things that are on the horizon for our movement and our group and our network, and the things that we feel like we need to do and the difference that they're going to make and the amount of money that it was going to take to do it. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars that it was going to take to do some of that. And in the midst of that conversation about how churches can partner and how churches can come together and do something significant, one man raised his hand and he stood up. He pastors a church, I think, up in the Iron Range of Minnesota, rural area, rural congregation. He stood up. He said, "There are 12 people in my church. How much do you need from us?" That's a man who gets it. That's someone who understands that, hey, what matters most is not what's happening in my life right now where I am at and where I'm placed. What matters most is the story that I'm connecting myself to and participating in and doing something through. Now, when you do stuff like this, when you take steps like this, what's phenomenal about this and fascinating and kind of throws us off a little bit, when we actually allow ourselves to step into things that matter that are so much bigger than us, what actually happens in this moment is your life actually begins to feel simultaneously more meaningful and also smaller at the same time. You've experienced this before. There have been moments, so many of you have told me about moments, where you've stepped into something to serve, to make a difference, to do something. You've shown up at a food shelf. You've shown up to serve at a soup kitchen. You've partnered with a homeless shelter. You've partnered with something that matters in our world, and you stepped in to do something about it. And at the end of your time serving, what you said was something along these lines: "Man, that was so rewarding. And I didn't do anything." What you actually meant in that moment was I feel like I did something, but I also feel like there's so much more to be done that the thing that I did didn't feel like it did anything quite at all, and yet I felt the reward and the fulfillment that came from that. Your life both simultaneously feels more meaningful and also smaller at the same time. Smaller not because it became less meaningful, smaller because you put yourself in the center of a bigger story. And when we do that, that is where we find greatness. Now, what's beautiful about all of this, we've been in this series called Origin Stories. We've been talking about the earliest stories of faith in our world. What's beautiful about all of it is that story continued over and over, year after year after year, century after century after century, and it culminated and really kind of came to a tipping point about 2,000 years ago in the person of Jesus. And in that moment, God actually began to enter our world in a way that man had never seen before, but this time, he didn't take the stairs. He showed up in the smallest of ways that became the biggest of ways. He showed up in a way that said, hey, I'm not here to create confusion. I'm actually here to create clarity about the story that I've been writing for thousands of years in our world. He showed up in a way that said, hey, that temple that you built me is great, but hey, you know what? You actually yourself are a temple. And I actually desire to reside within you. It's a story that he continues to write today. A story that he actually continues to invite you and me over and over and over again to be a part of. It's a story that, quite honestly, when we kind of actually lean into it, we actually allow ourselves to engage with it. It's a story that almost feels like too good to be true. It feels so wonderful and so amazing and so good, it doesn't feel like it's actually possible. In fact, some of us are familiar with this story. But in time, we've actually become so familiar with the story that we've forgotten just how beautiful it is. So for the next 5 weeks, in 2 weeks, we're going to kick off a series. It's a series that we're calling So Good to Be True. It's a series about the story that God's been writing in our world, the story that he continues to invite you and invite me to be a part of. And let me tell you about this series real quick. In this series, we're going to actually lean into the person of Jesus, which is really the tipping point of the story that God's been writing in our world. And I'll just be honest with you. There have been seasons of my life where I actually was so aware of this story that I actually lost the beauty and the goodness of this story. My fear is that for some of us, maybe we find ourselves in seasons like that as well. There's also some of us in the room who find ourselves unsure of what this story actually looks like. You're new to your journey. You're just kicking it around. You're just engaging with it, but you haven't quite fully engaged with the person of Jesus in the story. God used him to write. So in this series, we're going to lean into that for 5 weeks. We're going to talk about the difference that Jesus made in our world. We're going to talk about the historical perspectives behind Jesus and ask ourselves, did Jesus actually do the things that his earliest followers said that he did? Actually lean into that and look at the historical evidence behind that. We're going to look at the difference. It's the most important part, the difference that makes in your life. And it might just tell you, if you have someone in your life who's new to the faith, kind of early in their faith journey, or has never actually engaged with the story and the person of Jesus, this is the series to invite them to. If you find yourself in a season of life where you've become so familiar with the person of Jesus that you actually have lost sight of the beauty and the goodness and the impact that it has for you day in and day out, this is a series for you as well. I hope you'll be a part of it. Now we're going to jump into that in 2 Sundays. Next Sunday, you're going to get the chance to hear from someone who you don't often get to hear from here at the Co, and I'm super excited for you to experience that. So we'll have that next Sunday, and then 2 Sundays, we'll jump into this series together. Let me pray for us, and then we'll go. God, I thank you for this morning. God, I thank you for the ways that you continue to invite us into a story that's so much bigger than ourselves. God, I know in my own life I find myself over and over again just losing sight of what you're doing. God, I get distracted by my own problems. I get distracted by the things that seem like they matter to me in the moment, the things that I'm not sure how to resolve, or the moments where I feel like my life isn't actually amounting to the things that maybe I hoped that it once would. God, for those of us in the room who feel that way, God, would you point us to the moments of greatness around us? Not greatness because of who we are or what we do, but greatness because of the story that you're inviting us into and the things you're inviting us to participate with you in. God, would you put the person in our path this week that we need to lean into and encourage? Would you put the need in our world in front of our eyes in this week in the way that we can't mistake or ignore, in a way that we can't help but do something about? God, would you help us to lose sight of ourselves a little bit more? Would you help us to actually lose ourselves in the grandness of what you're seeking to do in the world around us? God, thank you for inviting us into us. Would you help us to be the kind of people who say yes? God, we love you. We thank you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.